The Old West, often romanticized in movies and books, was a time of adventure, lawlessness, and unique cultural dynamics. Beyond the tales of cowboys and outlaws, this era is rich with fascinating and lesser-known facts that reveal the true complexity of life on the American frontier. From the diverse backgrounds of cowboys to the pivotal role of railroads, these intriguing details paint a vivid picture of the realities of the Wild West. In this video, we'll explore interesting facts about the Old West that you might not know.
Cowboys. In the Wild West, the cowboy stands as the quintessential symbol of the American frontier, a rugged gunslinger in a Stetson, embodying a strict moral code and confronting the untamed wilderness with unwavering resolve. However, the reality of these cowpunchers, as they called themselves, was far removed from Hollywood's romanticized image. Cowpunching was grueling, blue-collar labor. Most cowboys were rough and often illiterate individuals who engaged in heavy drinking, occasional brawls, and frequent stints in jail. Their attire was practical and designed for the harsh conditions of outdoor work, far from the stylized outfits of movie cowboys. Rather than exhibiting moral purity, many are known for aggressive behavior, and health records show high rates of disease among them. Poems and writings from the time frequently reference intimate bonds between men, challenging modern assumptions about the nature of masculinity and relationships in the Old West. This suggests that the romantic and social dynamics among cowboys were more diverse and fluid than commonly portrayed. The legendary camaraderie between figures like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid may have encompassed deeper emotional connections, reflecting the complexity of human relationships in frontier society. Understanding the true nature of cowboys and their relationships requires revisiting historical sources with a critical lens. By examining these aspects more deeply, we gain a richer understanding of the cultural and social dynamics that shaped the Wild West. From the truth behind the infamous OK Corral shootout to the surprising diversity of frontier towns, the Old West was far stranger than Hollywood ever depicted. Gunfight at the OK Corral. It's arguably the most legendary gunfight in American history, the kind of event that filmmakers like Sam Peckinpah would romanticize, but the reality is far less glamorous. Contrary to popular belief, the famous showdown didn't actually occur at the OK Corral, but in a nearby alley. Its association with the corral likely stems from the catchier name. Moreover, the body count was modest, with only 3 casualties. The entire altercation lasted a mere 30 seconds, during which 2 of the participants fled the scene. The aftermath of the gunfight was far from heroic. Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, celebrated in folklore as frontier heroes, were initially arrested on charges of murder. Earp subsequently lost his position as sheriff, and revelations emerged that one of the deceased men was unarmed. Reports even suggested that Holliday may have fired the first shot, echoing the contentious nature of the altercation. Although Earp and Holliday were eventually acquitted, public opinion in Tombstone was divided. At the funeral of the 3 men killed, 300 mourners attended, while nearly 2,000 citizens lined the procession route, a testament to the community's divided sentiments and the gravity of the event. The mythologization of the OK Corral shootout didn't occur until decades later. In 1931, a book portrayed Wyatt Earp as a virtuous figure, transforming his reputation from a controversial lawman into a symbol of frontier justice. By that time, many of the individuals involved had either passed away or were elderly, reflecting a reinterpretation of history through a more idealized lens. Historically, the OK Corral shootout serves as a microcosm of the complexities and contradictions of the Old West. It illustrates how events can be distorted over time, evolving from a local incident into a national legend. The fascination with figures like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday highlights America's enduring interest in frontier mythology and the ways in which historical narratives are shaped by cultural memory and storytelling. Understanding the truth behind such events requires a critical examination of primary sources and contemporary accounts. By contextualizing the OK Corral shootout within its historical and social framework, we gain insights into the realities of law enforcement, justice, and public perception in the American West during the late 19th century. Native American culture. Before Europeans arrived to cultivate the land, the prevailing narrative often portrayed America as a vast, empty expanse with only scattered indigenous tribes engaging in simple rituals and living peacefully. This depiction overlooks the rich and complex societies that flourished across the continent. Contrary to the misconception of isolated tribes, Native American civilization was diverse and populous. Estimates suggest that before Columbus's voyages, the indigenous population may have numbered as high as 100 million. These societies were highly developed, with sophisticated agricultural practices, complex trade networks spanning vast distances, and even the construction of substantial urban centers. For example, Cahokia, located near present-day St. Louis, was one of North America's largest pre-Columbian cities, boasting monumental earthworks and a population that rivaled some of Europe's medieval cities. This evidence challenges the notion of an untamed wilderness waiting to be settled by European colonizers. Unfortunately, the arrival of Europeans brought catastrophic consequences for Native American populations. The introduction of diseases like smallpox, to which Native Americans had no immunity, led to devastating epidemics that decimated their communities. Scholars estimate that up to 90% of the indigenous population perished in the decades following contact with Europeans, leaving societies shattered and vulnerable. Beyond disease, European colonization also brought violence, displacement, and systematic efforts to eradicate indigenous cultures and lands. The legacy of European colonization continues to impact Native American communities today, contributing to ongoing socioeconomic disparities, health challenges, and cultural resilience efforts. Recognizing and understanding the true history of Native Americans before European contact is essential for addressing historical injustices and promoting a more inclusive and accurate portrayal of America's past. Prostitutes. A staple of Westerns is the portrayal of the prostitute with a heart of gold, a trope so prevalent that it has its own dedicated page on TV tropes. However, the reality of prostitution in the Old West was far from romantic or glamorous. It was marked by exploitation, degradation, and profound trauma, not unlike the challenges faced by sex workers today. Historical accounts, such as Anne Butler's book, Daughters of Joy, Sisters of Misery, highlight the grim conditions faced by frontier prostitutes. These women experienced high rates of suicide, addiction, and violence. Their lives were often mired in despair, exacerbated by the harsh realities of their profession. Local newspapers of the time often exacerbated their plight by sensationalizing their personal tragedies. They would publicly shame and humiliate these women, sometimes driving them to desperate measures, such as suicide. This callous reporting not only added to their suffering, but also perpetuated harmful stereotypes about women in the sex trade. According to Annie Proulx and other historians, brothels in the Old West often functioned as poverty traps. Women who entered this profession did so out of economic desperation, with few viable alternatives for survival. Competition among prostitutes for clients and meager earnings created a hostile environment where exploitation and abuse were rampant. The image of the prostitute, with a heart of gold in westerns, romanticizes a harsh and exploitative reality. These women faced immense challenges and hardships, often with little support or recourse. Their stories remind us of the broader social and economic inequalities that shaped life on the frontier, where survival often meant compromising one's dignity and well-being. Understanding the true history of prostitution in the Old West requires acknowledging the complexities and injustices faced by these women. By examining their experiences with empathy and historical accuracy, we gain a deeper understanding of the social dynamics and inequalities of the time. Multiculturalism. In the Wild West. The classic Hollywood depiction of the West involves rugged, all-American white men either teaming up with or battling other American white men. Occasionally, you might see a few black characters, some Mexicans, and the occasional Irishman thrown in for comedic effect. But the narrative mainly focuses on white Americans, right? Not quite. Similar to late 19th century New York, the Wild West was a melting pot of cultures, with people from diverse backgrounds seeking opportunities. For instance, Rock Springs in Wyoming had a population of under 10,000, but included as many as 56 different nationalities. Slovakians, Finns, Norwegians, Germans, Ottomans, Swedes, and Chinese were among the many who migrated to the South and Midwest, an influx that only grew with the Californian gold rush. This influx of diverse peoples contributed significantly to the cultural and economic development of the West. Many Chinese immigrants, for instance, played crucial roles in building the Transcontinental Railroad, while Mexican vaqueros were essential in shaping cowboy culture and cattle ranching practices. Additionally, Black Americans, both freedmen and former slaves, sought new lives in the West, with some even becoming respected lawmen and cowboys. The multicultural reality of the Old West challenges the Hollywood myth of an exclusively white frontier. The portrayal of the West as a bastion of American values is more a product of Hollywood's historical casting biases than actual history. During the time these films were made, the inclusion of non-American voices and faces was rare, reinforcing a skewed perception of the past. Examining the historical context, the diversity of the Old West becomes even more apparent. The California Gold Rush of 1848-1855, for example, attracted prospectors from Latin America, Europe, Australia, and China. These immigrants brought their unique customs, languages, and traditions, enriching the cultural tapestry of the region. In mining towns and frontier settlements, people of different nationalities often lived and worked side by side. Despite inevitable conflicts and prejudices, there were also instances of cooperation and cultural exchange. For instance, Mexican mining techniques were adopted by other miners, and Chinese immigrants introduced new agricultural practices. Moreover, Native American tribes, who were the original inhabitants of the land, played a significant yet often overlooked role in the history of the West. Their interactions with settlers ranged from trade and cooperation to conflict and displacement, further adding to the complexity of the region's history. The true story of the Old West is one of multiculturalism and diversity, far removed from the homogeneous image perpetuated by classic Hollywood films. The rich mosaic of people who inhabited the West, each contributing their labor, culture, and resilience, shaped the frontier in profound ways. Understanding this complexity provides a more accurate and inclusive view of American history. The Outlaws. If there's one thing the Old West is famously associated with, it's outlaws. Names like Billy the Kid, Wild Bill Hickok, and Jesse James still evoke images of rugged men striking matches off their stubble. However, the reality is that many of these infamous figures were not as tough as their legends suggest. For instance, when Buffalo Bill launched his Wild West touring show, Wild Bill Hickok joined the cast only to be fired because his voice was too high-pitched. Contrary to popular belief, Hickok's moniker didn't come from avenging insults about his voice. Instead, Bill referred to his prominent nose, earning him the nickname Duck Bill. Other outlaws also fell short of their macho reputations. Jesse James, for example, was so vain that he left press releases at his crime scenes, glorifying his exploits. This behavior paints a picture of someone more concerned with their image than their outlaw activities. Billy the Kid is perhaps the most notable example of exaggerated legends. While stories from his lifetime claim he killed over 20 people, historical records indicate the number was closer to 4. Billy the Kid's reputation as a deadly gunslinger is more myth than fact, resembling the boastful individual at parties who exaggerates their past brawls. In the Wild West, it's clear that the myth-making around these figures was often driven by sensationalist media and public fascination with the outlaw archetype. Newspapers of the time played a significant role in embellishing the exploits of these men, turning them into larger-than-life characters. Wild Bill Hickok, for example, was a lawman and a showman who understood the power of storytelling in building his legend. Despite his unremarkable voice, his sharpshooting skills and flamboyant personality ensured he remained a central figure in Wild West folklore. Billy the Kid's legend, similarly, grew out of a combination of youthful bravado and media hype. While his actual criminal record was relatively modest, his daring escapes and confrontations with lawmen captured the public's imagination, transforming him into a symbol of rebellious youth and defiance. The true stories of these outlaws reveal a complex interplay between fact and fiction. Their enduring legacies are as much a product of their own self-promotion and media sensationalism as their actual deeds. The Old West, often romanticized as a time of relentless toughness and machismo, was also a period where image and reputation were carefully curated, laying the groundwork for the myths that persist to this day. Violence in the Old West. Shootouts, bank robberies, and elaborate bar brawls. If there's one thing we think we know about the frontier, it's that it was an incredibly violent place. But was it really? The widely accepted image of the Old West as a land where rugged men settled disputes with gunfire is largely a myth. In reality, people on the frontier were more inclined to cooperate than to fight. In a harsh and often lawless environment, it was more beneficial to work together with neighbors for mutual gain than to engage in violent confrontations. This spirit of cooperation was essential for survival and prosperity in such a challenging landscape. Bank robberies, a staple of Old West legends, were actually quite rare. Historical estimates suggest there were only about a dozen bank robberies during the entire frontier period. This scarcity indicates that such criminal acts were not as common as popular culture suggests. Homicide rates in frontier towns were also surprisingly low. For example, the highest annual number of homicides in Tombstone was 5. From 1870 to 1885, Dodge City and Wichita experienced murder rates of just 0.6 per year. These statistics paint a picture of a much less violent society than the one depicted in movies and folklore. The perception of the Old West as a violent place is further undermined when we examine the broader social and economic context. Many settlers were focused on building communities, farming, ranching, and establishing businesses. The need for a stable and secure environment for these activities often outweighed the desire for violent conflict. Law enforcement, though sometimes stretched thin, played a significant role in maintaining order and discouraging lawlessness. Moreover, the low levels of recorded violence suggest that frontier towns implemented effective measures to prevent and address crime. Community vigilance and informal social controls likely contributed to the low homicide rates. This cooperative spirit and commitment to communal well-being are aspects of frontier life that are often overshadowed by more dramatic narratives. Daily life in the Old West was far less violent than commonly believed. The myth of a lawless and blood-soaked frontier is largely a product of sensationalized stories and Hollywood embellishments. Gun control. If Back to the Future 3 taught us anything, it's that everyone in the Old West carried a gun. Visiting places like Deadwood or Dodge City seemed synonymous with being prepared for trouble. However, carrying a firearm in Dodge City was more likely to get you into trouble than out of it. When Dodge City established its local government, the first law passed was to ban the carrying of firearms within town limits. The infamous gunfight at the OK Corral erupted because Wyatt Earp was attempting to enforce this very law. Dodge City wasn't unique in this respect. Towns like Wichita and Tombstone implemented similar firearm restrictions and enforced them rigorously. Historical records indicate that the second most common reason for arrest in the Old West was the illegal carrying of firearms. This fact underscores that sheriffs and local authorities were serious about gun control, contrary to the popular image of a lawless frontier. In the Old West, the gun control laws in these towns were a response to the frequent violence and disorder that accompanied the influx of people seeking fortune and new opportunities. The local governments aimed to create a semblance of order and safety by limiting the number of firearms on the streets. These laws were not merely symbolic. They were actively enforced by lawmen who understood the dangers of widespread gun ownership in densely populated and often volatile environments. Interestingly, modern-day Tombstone has less restrictive gun laws than its Old West counterpart. This paradox highlights how our contemporary understanding of the Old West as a place of unchecked violence and pervasive gun ownership is more myth than reality. The actual historical measures for public safety and gun control were, in many ways, stricter and more diligently enforced than those in place today. This examination of Old West firearm laws reveals a complex and nuanced reality. Rather than a chaotic and anarchic environment, many frontier towns actively pursued policies to ensure the safety and order of their communities. The contrast between historical and modern gun laws in places like Tombstone challenges our preconceived notions and invites a deeper understanding of the past. Camels. John Wayne never rode a camel in any of his films. However, if he had, it would have been historically accurate. Believe it or not, the southwestern United States was once home to hundreds of feral camels, all due to a government experiment. In 1855, Congress allocated $30,000 to purchase and transport camels from Egypt. The rationale was that these resilient dromedaries would handle the arid southwest terrain better than horses, thus facilitating lengthy survey missions. By 1857, the U.S. Army had acquired 70 camels, and initial trials showed promising results. However, the onset of the Civil War disrupted these efforts. Amid the ensuing turmoil, several camels escaped into the wild. Left to their own devices, they thrived and reproduced, eventually becoming a part of Texas's wildlife for nearly a century. The last known sighting of these feral camels was reported in 1941. This fascinating episode in American history highlights a unique and largely forgotten aspect of our past. It underscores the innovative and sometimes unconventional approaches taken by the government to address logistical challenges. Moreover, it serves as a reminder of the diverse and unexpected ways animals have been integrated into the development of the United States. In the lifetimes of our grandparents, the American landscape included not just the iconic horses and cattle, but also wild camels roaming the plains of Texas.
Please like and share if you find the video content interesting and useful. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment below so as not to miss the upcoming interesting videos. Thanks for watching.